Hello and welcome. The United States has announced that following talks at the G20 summit in Argentina between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, America will not go ahead with its threat to raise tariffs against China to a rate of 25%. A White House statement said the rate for $200 billion worth of goods will remain at the current 10%. The statement said in order to reduce the trade imbalance, China has agreed to buy a substantial amount of agricultural, energy and industrial products from the US. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has welcomed the agreement at a news conference, saying it had opened up new space for what he called win-win cooperation. Well, let's go to Peter Petrie. He's a Carl Shapiro Professor of International Finance in the Brandeis International Business School. He's going to take us all through it. He's in Boston at the moment. Peter, thank you so much for your time. Can you explain the significance of what's been agreed?
Oh, well, first of all, this was a huge meeting, very high stakes. Markets have been very unstable for several weeks. The Chinese economy is declining. So in the midst of this was a very serious meeting. And I think, at least from the news that we are hearing from now, it went very well. What it produced was an interim agreement. It produced a series of commitments by the United States to stand off on increasing tariffs, and by China to make some purchases, and some other concessions, which I'll mention in a second. And on the other hand, they agreed for a 90-day period to study very carefully the issues which are still dividing them. And these are large issues. It's going to be a complex negotiation, but the news, at least for now, is quite good.
We've been hearing a lot about a trade war between the US and China. Does it mean it's over?
No. I think that would be too optimistic an interpretation. But at least it gives us breathing room. At least we know that both sides are serious about reaching an agreement, and it gives them time to examine these complicated issues quite closely. During this 90-day period, they have committed themselves to talking about intellectual property rights, making sure that China enforces intellectual property rights more carefully, that it refrains from using cyber techniques to steal intellectual property, to transfer intellectual property. In the meantime, they will also buy products involving agricultural products, energy products, industrial products, and will permit a fairly major acquisition by Qualcomm, a technology company, to go forward. So that there's a whole bunch of things that they've agreed to. In fact, the agreement is more specific than I think many of us expected at this stage.
Donald Trump was heavily criticized from some quarters when he slapped these tariffs on China. But now that we're seeing perhaps some concessions, has this strategy worked?
Well, I think for a long time there has been pressure on China from the United States and some of its other trade partners to begin reviewing and changing its recent policy trends. So to the extent that this confirms that those changes are now underway, it has worked, but many of the demands that I think Donald Trump raised in the beginning, for example, closing the trade deficit with China entirely, it's not going to happen quickly, if at all. So one can't say that everything that he asked for is happening, but certainly there are concessions being made by the Chinese, and I think in turn it's very appropriate for the United States to stand down on some of its threats.
Peter Petrie, thank you so much for taking us through all of that. Peter Petrie from the Brandeis International Business School in Boston. Well, there have been running street battles in the heart of Paris during the latest protests by the so-called yellow vests, or gilets jaunes. More than 200 people have been arrested during the third successive weekend of demonstrations. The protesters are angry at rises in taxes, especially on fuel. Today they clashed with riot police on the Champs-Élysées. Police used water, cannon and stun grenades to drive back demonstrators. Hugh Schofield sent this report from Paris.
Darkness fell at the end of a day of violence in Paris, and still it went on. At At the Arc de Triomphe, covered now in anti-Macron graffiti, police fired water cannon to clear the crowds. And here, in the gardens by the Louvre, one protester is now in a coma after they tore down the metal grille. This evening, the Arc de Triomphe is back under police control, but there are still knots of protesters out there. There's still the tang of tear gas in the air. And in the streets around here, a trail of destruction. Cars burned out, shop windows smashed, bank windows smashed. Parisians are used to protests, but this has been of a rare violence. All day there were running battles between riot police and yellow vest protesters. Though how many of these were actually agitators of the far right and the far left is one unanswered question. They tore up cobblestones to fling at police and set alight to cars and buildings. And amid the scenes of destruction, ordinary people who'd come from across France to demonstrate peaceably. They didn't want the violence to divert attention from their central message, which is that taxes in France have gone too far.
Abraham Lincoln said something important. He said that government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. For the people. Our politicians should keep that in mind. They won't get anywhere until they put the people first.
We've all had enough. It's been going on for so long, and eventually you have to resist. There's no choice.
Who are you?
We are the people. You don't have to look any further. Not right, not left. We're just the simple people.
The intensity of the violence has left France shocked. It leaves President Macron with an urgent dilemma. Does he appease or face down this protest of the people? Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Well, while the tear gas was being deployed in Paris, President Macron was in Buenos Aires at the G20 summit. He gave this reaction to the violence on the streets of his capital city.
Ce qui s'est passé aujourd'hui à Paris n'a rien à voir.
What happened in Paris today has absolutely nothing to do with the peaceful demonstration of a legitimate unhappiness or discontent. But this does not justify that public buildings be set afire, that journalists be threatened, or that the Arc de Triomphe be tagged.
Emmanuel Macron. Well, let's get some of the day's other news now. The top US naval officer in the Middle East has been found dead at his home in Bahrain. Vice Admiral Scott Tierney was commander of the 5th Fleet, which is responsible for all US Navy forces in the Gulf region. He took over as commander last May and had 36 years of service in the Navy.
This is devastating news for the Sterney family, for the team at 5th Fleet, and for the entire Navy. Scott Sterney was a decorated naval warrior. He was a devoted husband and father, and he was a good friend to all of us. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Bahraini Ministry of Interior are cooperating on the investigation, but at this time, no foul play is suspected. Rear Admiral Paul Schließ, the Deputy Commander of 5th Fleet, has assumed command and is maintaining continuity in our responsibilities and posture in the U.S. 5th Fleet.
An Egyptian film star is to be put on trial over the dress she wore to the Cairo Film Festival. Rania Youssef has been accused by a group of lawyers of obscenity. There was widespread criticism of this outfit on Egyptian social media, but some defended the actor's right to wear what she liked. Rania Youssef herself has issued an apology, saying she wouldn't have worn the dress if she'd known it would cause such controversy. Now, recovering efforts are continuing in Alaska after a large earthquake on Friday. The epicenter was about 13 kilometers north of the state's biggest city, Anchorage. Our North America correspondent James Cook reports.
We are now very close to where the epicenter of this 7-magnitude earthquake rattled Alaska. And as you can see, they're working hard to try to clear away the damage. They're worried about this piece of road because there have been many aftershocks. They want to get this unstable ground removed as quickly as possible. There's a crack running along there as well, as you can see, but there's also a small crack on the other side of the road, and they're concerned that with more and more aftershocks, more than 500 so far, that this could potentially collapse at any moment. So they're working fast to clear it, to make it safe, and then of course they'll start the work on repairing and rebuilding the road. This isn't the only place where this has happened. Quite a few areas like this around Anchorage where there's been significant damage to infrastructure, but on the whole, this place has held up very, very well. And what was a really strong earthquake, and one which rattled Alaskans who are used to earthquakes. There are thousands every year. There are people here and they're used to them. But many people say they were really quite frightened by this one, which went on for a good long time. Very severe, violent shaking. And actually it seems quite remarkable that they've escaped to the extent that they have. One of the reasons for that, though, is because the history of Alaskan earthquakes, everyone talks about 1964, and then there was a 9.2 magnitude earthquake, one of the most powerful ever recorded on the Earth. That prompted Alaskans to think about their building codes, their regulations, and clearly the work that they did then and in the years since has paid off, because very, very few structures were destroyed by this quake.
Well, do stay with us on BBC News, still to come. We'll get the lowdown on the celebrity wedding, which is the talk in both Bollywood and Hollywood.
It's quite clear that the worst victims of this disaster are the poor people living in the slums which have sprung up around the factory.
I am feeling so helpless that the children are dying in front of me and I can't do anything.
Charles Manson is the mystical leader of the hippie cult suspected of killing Sharon Tate and at least 6 other people in Los Angeles.
At 11 o'clock this morning, just half a metre of rock separated Britain from continental Europe. It took the drills just a few moments to cut through the final obstacle. Then Philippe Cosette, a miner from Calais, was shaking hands and exchanging flags with Robert Fagg, his opposite number.
This is BBC News, the latest headlines. After a long meeting at the G20 summit, President Trump has agreed to suspend plans to impose new tariffs on Chinese imports due to enter force next month. French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned rioting in the heart of Paris by anti-government protesters angered by tax rises. Well, the White House says there will be a national day of mourning next Wednesday for the former president, George H.W. Bush, who's died aged 94. Arrangements are being made for a state funeral, which will be held at Washington National Cathedral. Flags are flying at half-mast across Washington. This, you can see now, is at the White House. Well, let's get more on the kind of man George Sr. was. Country music star Larry Gatlin was a close friend, and he joins me now from Indiana. Larry, thank you so much for your time, and I am sorry for your loss. If you can just start by telling us how you came to know George H.W. Bush.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be here with you folks to talk about this wonderful man. I was 16 years old. We lived in West Texas, a little town called Odessa, out in the middle of what they call the Permian Basin, the oil field of West Texas. And the Bush family lived in Midland, 20 miles away. And President Bush, then just George, was running for Congress. And we were doing a fundraiser over in Odessa. And my brothers, Steve and Rudy, and our little sister, LaDonna, sang a few songs. And, you know, the donors ate some barbecue and drank some beer and told stories. And then young George Bush and his wife, Barbara, he gave a wonderful speech as to why he thought he would appreciate their support. So that's the first time we met them. 18 years later, when he lost that election, by the way, for the Congress. But 18 years later in the White House, when he and President Reagan were elected, I walked over to him. We were celebrating their victory. And I walked over. On my way over there, he said, "Hey, you're one of those snotty-nosed little Gatlin boys I met in Odessa 20 years ago." We had had a little success in the meantime in the interim, but the first time we'd seen them. So they're old and dear family friends. It's a great loss to our country. but it was a life well lived, a life that was a blessing to many people. I've written an op-ed that will be on, well, it'll be on that one of those other channels of foxnews.com on their online service, and I just said, dear reader, George Bush, President George Bush, was the finest. I've never met a finer man in my life, and by the way, neither have you. So that's the way the Gatlin family feels about all of the Bush family. They're wonderful people, and he will be missed. It was a life well lived.
It sounds like in many ways you've watched George H.W. Bush's career from when you sort of knew him in childhood to when you later on reconnected. What would you say your best memory is of him?
Well, we were invited to go to Kennebunkport on different occasions. We went up there. We played golf together. I have a picture of President Bush and my son, Joshua Cash Gatlin, when he was about 12 years old, and they're holding up a big old fish. We all decided to go into Kennebunkport to see the little town. That it would be really exciting. Well, we went to Kennebunkport, and it took about 3 minutes to see Kennebunkport, and we missed a great fishing trip with my son and with President Bush. So we went on cruises with them. The bus is rattling. Can you see it? We just hit a bump. They're, like I say, wonderful people. To watch his son be inaugurated as the 43rd president, and just to see his humanity. A friend of mine, another transplanted Texan, a gentleman named Darrell Royal, was the head football coach for many years at the University of Texas. Coach Royal had a saying. He said, you can tell what kind of person someone really is by the way they treat the people who can't do anything for them. I love that about President George Bush. He treated everybody as a neighbor and as a friend. Whether you could help him or would vote for him or not, he treated you like a man or like a woman with dignity. And as I say, I miss him already.
I must say we didn't realize you were speaking to us on a tour bus, so thank you for taking the time. I just wanted to ask briefly whether you've been in touch with the family since and how they're coping.
I have talked with some of their, with Laura Pears in President Bush's office. I have not talked to either W, President Bush 43, or Laura, or any of the family, but they have gotten with us about the, the ceremony, the homegoing, the celebration of his life in Houston on the 6th, I believe. My brothers and I will be in Oklahoma City on the 5th doing a concert, and as fate would have it, we're going to be in Midland, Texas, the old Bush family home there in Midland, for a concert on the evening of the 6th. So we're going to get up early from Oklahoma City and go fly to see our friends, and then have to hop in a chartered plane to get to our performance in Midland that night. But there's you can't, anything you do for that nice family, you're not going out of your way, because they are worthy of our love and respect and of our condolences. But, the good book says that the angels rejoice at the death of the saints. Well, he might not have exactly been a saint, but he's a pretty darn good old boy.
Larry Gatlin, country music star, thank you so much for your time and talking about your memories of George Bush Sr., who's died at the age of 94.
God bless you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Well, let's change the tone a little bit and go to some sport news. We're just a few hours away from one of boxing's biggest nights of the year. These two men, America's Deontay Wilder and the UK's Tyson Fury, will step into the ring in Los Angeles for a heavyweight world title fight. Both men are unbeaten. Wilder holds the WBC belt. Fury held multiple versions of the title before taking 2 years out from the sport with the doping ban and personal issues. Sports correspondent Dan Rowan takes up the story.
We're going to find out whether or not Tyson Fury can do what very few British boxers have managed over the years and become just the third in history to win a world title fight on American soil. This has become, California, familiar territory for him because he's been training here for the last 2.5 months, and certainly at the weigh-in yesterday the sense was that he was the home fighter. He looked very relaxed, very positive, tremendous support from hundreds of fans who have flown in to support him. And certainly, if he were to prevail tonight, given what he's gone through, he's lost 10 stone, got himself into great shape after those well-documented problems, it would go down as one of the great British sporting comebacks. But standing in his way is the fearsome punching power of Deontay Wilder. The American has won of his 40 fights by knockout. Like Fury, he is undefeated. Something has to give this evening. The omens are good. 15 years ago, Lennox Lewis won in the Staples Center in LA in his final fight. Now we'll see whether or not Fury can do the same.
Dan Rowan. Now, the Bollywood star Priyanka Chopra has married US singer Nick Jonas in India. The couple were wed in a Christian ceremony inside a palace in the city of Jodhpur, reportedly officiated by the groom's father. Priyanka Chopra is one of Bollywood's biggest female leads, and her husband is a singer and former Disney star. The traditional henna body art that we can see there is part of the preludes to the ceremony. And she also said one of the special things about their relationship was the merging of their families' faiths and cultures. Well, Raj and Pablo from the BBC Asian Network popped into the studio a little earlier and spoke to me about the couple and their own friendship with Priyanka.
Ever since that she started, and we've interviewed her so many times, we've become friends, and we've even stayed at her house. And Pablo is madly in love with her. He's broken-hearted.
My mother really wanted me to marry her.
And Priyanka,
every time I met her, I was like, "Will you marry me?" And she's like, "Yeah."
It's been a running joke.
It's a running joke.
It's a running joke.
She's off the market now.
Yeah, well, I know. It's not happening.
Isn't it wonderful? It is absolutely magical.
The wedding of the century.
Bollywood meets Hollywood. What more can you want? Two of the most gorgeous people on the planet. Two superstars together.
If you think about what Nick's achieved, and if you think about what Priyanka's achieved outside of Bollywood in terms of an international level, it's a huge deal. I mean, these guys are going to be big, just in terms of like the coverage they're going to get. And I think Hello's got the deal for their pictures. It's going to be massive for Priyanka. It's going to be massive for Nick.
One of the things about Priyanka is like she's so down to earth, and she's so family orientated as well, and she's fallen in love with Nick Jonas' family. It's just like magical to see them together.
They're from two very different cultures. Tell us about that.
Well, he's from Texas. His family's from Texas, and they're quite orthodox Catholics, and they're quite traditional. Priyanka Chopra is from a Hindu background.
But Priyanka's kind of like, you know, she's been educated in New York. She's kind of quite a fave with multicultural, just in terms of kind of like accepting other faiths. And I think her parents, well, especially her mother and her brother,
because her dad's passed away.
Because her dad's passed away, is quite. They're quite kind of like, if this is what's going to make you happy, good for you.
But it's also Hinduism. We're very open. We're very open to different cultures, various traditions. And we're Bollywood. Bollywood, we have Christian families, we have Muslim families, we have Hindu families. Everyone gets together. It's all about a wedding.
As long as the costumes are right.
Yeah.
It did certainly seem to allude they posted some pictures that we've seen of some of the prep towards the Indian ceremony, but some of the comments, they were talking about kind of bringing the families together. So there seemed to be perhaps nodding to those two different cultures.
I think there's an assimilation that's going on where it is kind of an acceptance. But if you look at Priyanka's career, it's kind of gone from just being in Bollywood, then doing Quantico, and then going to Hollywood, and then kind of her accepting the fact that, you know what, it's almost like an education that, you know, if I want to marry somebody who's non-Asian,
that's fine.
It's fine.
And I think, you know, if you think of like the Catholic tradition, it's all about large families, it's all about the wedding as well, but it's family-centric as well. And that's what Indian culture is about, so it's a natural match.
And if you look at some of the pictures that are on, you know, social networking, Priyanka has put pictures of her and her mother-in-law everywhere, and it's quite heartwarming.
Do you think that she is the first truly global superstar?
You know, this is going back about 6 years ago. She took a big decision. She was at the top of her profession in Bollywood and decided, like, I want to break the Hollywood market. Nobody. And she whispered to us, should I do it? Should I not do it? And we said, you are going to be the new Sophia Loren, because she was a world superstar, and that's what Priyanka's becoming.
They're definitely fans. Raj and Pablo from the BBC Asian Network talking about Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas's wedding. Now do stay with us here on BBC World News. Much more coming up. If you want to contact me, I'm on Twitter at @RegidAhmed BBC, but also all of our top stories on the website.
The Atlantic winds are keeping things mild for us across much of the country. Temperatures into double figures right now in the south. How about the weather on Sunday itself? There will be some showers around, but also a little bit of sunshine too. Now here's the satellite image, all of that cloud streaming in off the Atlantic. This was earlier on, and in fact these clouds are also diving into western parts of Europe, where it's also very, very mild in France, Germany, as far east as Poland as well. Those temperatures are well above the average for the time of the year. And you can see this weather map here, this pattern of weather fronts moving in from the southwest. And this is the kind of pattern that we'll continue to see for quite a few more days, certainly through much of the week ahead. But here's the early hours of Sunday. Most of the rain has actually cleared away into the near continent, and behind it some clearer spells, but also quite a bit of cloud around here and there. Big temperature contrast between the north and the south of the country. This is colder air from the North Atlantic, so 3 degrees, whereas in the south it's those double figures. And this weather pattern, as I said, is going to continue through Sunday and into Monday. Most of the rain's actually cleared away into the heart of the continent, so we're sort of left over with this legacy of thick cloud, which will break up from time to time, and there will be some sunny spells around, but also some rain here and there too. And you can see these southwesterly winds dragging in that milder air. Now the winds will be pretty gusty for a time around some of these southern and western coasts. Lighter winds on the wind arrows here in the north, but this is where the air's coming from the north, so it's quite chilly there. In Aberdeen only 6 degrees, 15, maybe even 16 in London, so every bit as mild compared to what we had on Saturday. So here it is, those weather fronts keep marching in. Here's another one for Sunday, moving into Ireland, then Wales and central and southern areas of the UK. So expect some rain from early morning on Monday. Notice the wind direction has changed across Scotland. Could be a little bit of snow there, possibly across the mountains of Scotland early on Monday, but that's pretty much it. To the south of that, we've got that rain pushing through. So if you're heading off to work early in the morning on Monday, take a brolly just in case. There probably will be some rain at some point or another, if not in the morning, then in the afternoon. And the afternoon may clear up actually across northern and western areas. Still 13 in London on Monday. Now here's the outlook from Tuesday onwards. It stays on the mild side basically across the southern half of the UK. Further north, a bit of a cooler snap there for a while Tuesday, Wednesday, then possibly picking up again towards the end of the week. Bye-bye.
Join Simon McCoy as he brings you the top stories live.
The ball is entirely in the UK's court. We could have got our tennis correspondent to report on this.
The latest in sport.
Heaven knows how they're dealing with this on the court.
The heat or the wind? I'm not quite sure.
Well, both.
The day's weather.
It's getting colder.
And undeniable chemistry.
He's still laughing. We have to talk to each other.
There's only one Simon.
So you're the real McCoy.
Afternoon Live with Simon McCoy, weekdays at 2 p.m. on the BBC News Channel.
Follow the story, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. You can follow every moment in depth with BBC News. Get the full story at bbc.co.uk/news. Get the headlines as they happen with the breaking news alert. And keep up with events by watching the BBC News Channel in the app. Follow the story wherever you are with BBC News.
BBC News, the headlines. The US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have agreed to halt new trade tariffs for 90 days to allow for talks. The two men met in Buenos Aires after the G20 summit for their first talks since a trade war erupted this year. French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned violence in Paris during nationwide anti-government protests. More than 260 people have been detained. The so-called Yellow Vest movement is angry about taxation and a range of economic issues. Damage was caused to shops and the Arc de Triomphe was daubed with graffiti. Mexico's new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has been sworn in. He pledged to end what he called failed neoliberal policies that have led to an increase in poverty and mass migration. Those are the latest headlines. An investigation into temporary work has found agency workers are being paid hundreds of pounds a year less for doing exactly the same job as staff employees. The report by the Resolution Foundation think tank calls for the law to be changed to protect almost 1 million UK agency workers. Our business correspondent Coletta Smith has more.
24-year-old Conor McCann was employed by the agency Manpower to work in a BT call centre in Canterbury.
I found out that my colleagues who were doing the exact same job sat right next to me speaking to the exact same customers, selling the same products, were earning significantly more than me.
Research out this morning suggests Conor isn't alone. The Resolution Foundation say agency staff earn more than £400 less than those directly employed by a business. That's not just in low pay, but also unclaimed holiday or deductions for uniforms. They estimate that almost 1 million people in Britain work on these kind of contracts, and they want tougher regulation to protect staff. But the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, representing the industry, say agency work is vital to the economy because are paid the same. Conor's union took on the case and won. He says it's made a massive difference to cash flow and his mental health.
It's the difference between being able to go out and have a coffee, or being able to get a taxi home from a night out. It's those little things that really add up and make a huge difference.
The law already states that workers should get equal pay and perks after 12 weeks working with the same business. But the Resolution Foundation say more needs to be done to make sure people know their rights.
Now on BBC News, an investigation into China's hidden camps in our world.
Look at this. Wow.
This is the story of a search.
Like a city.
Well, in fact, it seems we're not being allowed to get this close to it at all.
For something China doesn't want us to find.
Can we ask some questions?
It's a story of broken families,
Anam dadamның ahvalını mənim xəbərim yox hazırlıqca.
broken faith,
Dinindən, etiqadından, adəmiylikindən vaz keç dedi.
and thousands of missing Muslims.
Satellites see beyond what the human eye can see.
And it's the story of the new evidence we've found, despite the attempts to stop us. Xinjiang, China's vast, far west, is a place of beauty. And fear. Checkpoints control the desert highways. And the region's towns and cities bristle with security. But there's something here they don't want the world to see.
So it's 8:30 in the morning now, and we've just arrived in the city of Yining, and straight away as we left the train station we've got 1, 2 and another one back there, 3 cars following us.
We're here to look for evidence of the network of camps in which China is reported to be detaining hundreds of thousands of Muslims.
Huge fences all around it, look.
Behind these blue steel walls, in a former school, is what China calls a re-education centre. But it looks more like a prison. Nearby, we find another.
Police station every few yards. Outside, relatives queue up to visit. But any attempt to get out and film is quickly interrupted. So this is as close as we're being allowed to get to one of these centres. Well, in fact, it seems we're not being allowed to get this close to it at all. So, for our investigation, we're turning to images that China can't so easily block. Satellite photos. Last year, the school behind the blue fence had a football pitch. Today, it's covered with what look like accommodation blocks. Watchtowers are visible. On a corner, just outside the camp fence, we try to speak to a family. What are you guys doing here? Some officials try to stop us filming, but another intervenes. Let them speak, she says. I ask who they're visiting. My dad, he says. Your dad's in there. Why can't we ask some questions? Xinjiang's main Muslim minority are known as the Uyghurs. Their distinct identity and faith and a history of separatism has long made them a target of suspicion. Now we find many homes locked and deserted. Estimates suggest as many as 1 million people may now be in the re-education camps. Official notices say the missing are being looked after. But no one dares to speak. The constant monitoring and following sees to that.